Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Here's a cool fact. A crocodile can't stick out its tongue. Another cool fact, you can get short-term health insurance for a month or just under a year in some states. United Healthcare short-term insurance plans are designed for people who are between jobs, coming off their parents' plan, or turning a side hustle into a full-time gig. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage with access to a nationwide network of doctors and hospitals. Get more cool facts about United Healthcare short-term plans at uh1.com.
Wow!
Nice!
Yeah!
What you're hearing are the sounds of people everywhere putting on Bombas socks, underwear, and T-shirts made from absurdly soft materials that feel like plush clouds. Yeah, that plush. And the best part? For every item you purchase, Bombas donates another to someone facing homelessness.
Bombas. Big comfort for everyone. Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/ACAST. Code ACAST.
Think of all the sleep hacks you've ever heard. You could spend years trying them all, or you could instantly transform your sleep with Boll & Branch. They make the softest, most breathable bedding you'll ever feel. And it's all 20% off. That's their best sale of the entire season. Millions of sleepers love their buttery soft sheets, airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and so much more. And you can try all of them for 20% off with promo code BUTTERY20. So hurry to bollandbranch.com today. That's BOLL and branch.com. See site for details.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Dr. Jan Eppingstall has a master's degree in counselling and a PhD in hoarding. As a counsellor in Australia, she works with people who hoard, and she has also contributed to research about hoarding. She is a regular guest on the podcast, and it is always a pleasure to host her. Jan, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me yet again.
You're very welcome. So today we are talking about cognitive dissonance. And a bit like when we talked about anthropomorphism, if you hear that word and have no idea what we're talking about, that's exactly why we're doing this episode. So don't tune out on that basis. So I'm going to start with a definition of cognitive dissonance, and then we're going to go into how it looks for people in general, and then in particular, obviously, at people who hoard. So, according to simplypsychology.org, cognitive dissonance refers to a situation involving conflicting attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. This produces a feeling of mental discomfort, leading to an alteration in one of the attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to reduce the discomfort and restore balance. So, Jan, starting with not particularly hoarding related, but just in general, could you give some examples of the kinds of cognitive dissonance that a lot of people are familiar with?
Yeah, sure. Look, this so takes me back to my early days of my psych undergraduate, where I was the nerdy mature age student sitting in the theatre with all the 19-year-olds. And I think cognitive dissonance was one of the first topics that we studied. And I think it's kind of been one of the more fruitful theories in social psychology. I just remember Leon Festinger. I remember his name. I loved his name. He's an American social psychologist. And he didn't even want to really work in social psychology. He was keen on child behaviour, but there you have it. I think one of the interesting things about cognitive dissonance, and one of the kind of examples that is often used, the classic example is smoking. And, smoking is unhealthy. I smoke. So this creates that cognitive dissonance, which is a psychological distress.
You know it's going to kill you, but you do it anyway.
You know it's going to kill you, but you do it anyway. Exactly. So we want to try and find a solution to resolve the tension, because we don't like the fact that these two pieces of information that relate to one another are not congruent. So they don't match. We really like things to be, we like information that's consistent. We like things to follow a kind of logical process, don't we? Therefore, and as a result, kind of consistency, rather than the but or type of inconsistency. We want to resolve that. I mean, I guess that's kind of what drives discovery in science, the inconsistencies, because we want to make it consistent. We want to understand why that happens. But, that psychological kind of distress or discomfort, if in the example of smoking, I can do a couple of different things. I can change my behavior.
And stop smoking.
Exactly. Smoking is unhealthy. I stop. Or I can change my beliefs. So the research on smoking is inconclusive. I continue to smoke.
My uncle smoked for 60 years and he was fine.
Spot on. And there's actually like the whole idea of it's very 1950s in a way for psychology, the way there's this kind of equation of how this all works, like they've got, this on top and the denominator's this, but it is very much two separate theoretical concepts. So there's that cognitive inconsistencies or discrepancies is one, and then the dissonance or discomfort is another. So they're kind of two separate things. So you can have the inconsistency, and you may be able to sit with that discomfort, or you want to change that. You want to bring the balance about.
It makes me think of people with like conspiracy theory beliefs, when something they firmly believe is, say, people who didn't believe COVID existed and then caught COVID and got very ill, or somebody they loved died of COVID. Often, rather than saying, I was wrong about COVID, it just adds a new belief to the pile and go, well, actually what's happening is this. And then if that's proved wrong, something else has to come in to relieve that. I can't cope with the fact that I don't believe this exists, but I had it and I felt really ill.
Exactly. Like Festinger, a quote from Festinger really spells that out. A man with conviction is a hard man to change. Tell him you disagree and he turns away. Show him facts or figures and he questions your sources. Appeal to logic and he fails to see your point, which is just beautiful. It is exactly that conspiracy theory, and the whole idea, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the layering on of these beliefs in order to build up, strength for the argument that the conviction that you've got, which is...
Yes.
And I know I do it.
We all do it. Absolutely. Like, if people have this vaccine, it will kill them. And then people weren't dying. So, it's going to kill them in 2 years because they don't want to make it too obvious. And then as 2 years passes, it's actually a longer term plan because it's, there's always another answer if you look hard enough.
Exactly.
So I strongly suspect that, like with procrastination, like with anthropomorphism, like with acquiring, cognitive dissonance is something that affects the majority of people to some degree, but hoarders maybe to a more extreme, as usual. Is that accurate?
Definitely. This is like a natural tendency. As I said before, we like that consistency and order in our thoughts. And it is part of the human condition. Some people are more sure of their beliefs than others, and live their life according to those strongly held convictions without wavering. Other people are kind of more flexible and curious about alternative ideas and live in the grey. So, it is something that we do find in the hoarding population, that they do hold on to their beliefs quite tightly, quite rigidly.
And even that can change within a person. I know when I was in my teens and 20s, everything was black and white and there was no nuance anywhere. It was all this, all that. Whereas now I'm in my 40s, everything is nuanced and everything is in the grey.
Yep. And when you join me in the 50s, you'll it'll be a wash of pasty, off-white beige, eggshell. Everything is just so grey. There's just no clear there's no clear right or wrong. But you're right, as you mature, well, some people do. Some people do.
Not
people who are
everybody.
open and curious, and then other people actually get more rigid.
Yes, more set in their beliefs.
More set in their beliefs, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Is cognitive dissonance a problem? Is it something we should worry about?
The short answer is no, but it depends. So as we said, our minds
a grey area, Jan.
It's a grey area.
Is there nuance in this?
Nuance. Like we are built for seeking out that order and putting evidence together that fits with our beliefs. Like that's kind of, without it, not much would have been achieved by humans. It's like we build our understanding of the world through a collection of knowledge blocks, and it's the way we make sense of our surroundings. And the discomfort is something that occurs naturally. I actually think a lack of cognitive dissonance, the distress felt when the competing beliefs collide, could actually be more of a problem than the presence of it, because some of us are so rigid that we can't even hear or process the information that's inconsistent with our thoughts. We might not even feel the distress at all because inconsistent ideas just kind of bounce off our brain. And this is kind of most evident for me in therapy when I'm working with clients. When we engage in therapy and look for answers about why we do what we do, there's a tendency for many people I work with to be inflexible about suggestions that I make. There is the yes, but response. And it's often not intentional. But research actually, I remember watching a video that Stephen Hayes, one of the developers of ACT, had recorded, and he was just incredulous about this research he just read. And he was just, I can't believe it. I just read this article that said that if a thought doesn't fit with someone's belief system, it will not even go in. It won't even register. It won't even be processed. It just bounces off. And just his reaction to that has stuck with me. And I think about that often when I'm working with someone. I can tell when the clients don't hear what I've said because I get that yes, but answer. I can tell that they're not actually hearing it and they're just going, yes, but, and this is my answer to why I do it that way. And I find I do need to plant ideas again and again until the client hears it, and usually they think it's their own idea, which is great because if you voice it in your own voice, it actually, you're more likely to change rather than someone telling you. I mean, I'm planting the seed, I guess. But I do think that without cognitive dissonance, we don't know that there's without the actual distress or that kind of discomfort, we don't even register that there are other ideas out there. So I would say, no, it's not a problem. No, it's not a problem. is my answer, but it's still grey.
What isn't? So looking at hoarding in particular, I feel like cognitive dissonance is everywhere. It's why I suggested the topic, and it's why you jumped right on it when I did. I want things to change in my home, but I don't do what I need to do to change them. I want space, but I don't make space. I want to keep things from landfill, but I buy things that will end up in landfill. How significant is cognitive dissonance for hoarders?
Yes, very interesting question. We've talked about FOMO before, and there's research to suggest that those with high FOMO tendencies have more cognitive dissonance. So, in fact, panic buying in a recent study out of Turkey that they did during the COVID supply uncertainty, they found that panic buying fully mediated the relationship between FOMO and cognitive dissonance. So panic buying only happened when those two variables, it only happened via those two variables. So it makes total sense to me. And even more so for the audience that'll be listening to this podcast. We know that people who hoard report higher levels and are more sensitive to anxiety. There's been a number of studies around that. And they also report lower distress tolerance than controls. So cognitive dissonance is psychological distress. So for a person who hoards, they will feel this distress more acutely. They may not have more, volume of stuff probably means they have more often if they're attempting to change. But for a person who hoards, they will really feel that much more acutely, the distress, or that's what they report.
A while ago, I interviewed on the podcast a therapist who specializes in OCD and who also developed OCD herself, having already worked in the field for years, which is fascinating. It didn't happen the other way round, that she had OCD and became a therapist. She had been an OCD therapist and then had a baby and developed. So fascinating. Anyway,
fascinating.
Something that she said that has really stuck with me is that there was a study done where people with OCD and people without OCD kept track just of the number of intrusive thoughts they had over a period of time. And the mind-blowing thing is the number of intrusive thoughts were the same. The difference was that people with OCD believed them and people without OCD didn't believe them. Isn't that interesting?
Definitely. And it is that perception of the thought, isn't it? And that's what we try to highlight often is, and that's exactly like this with distress. How much distress do you feel? And it on a scale of 1 to 10. And it seems when people self-report, people who hoard who self-report will say, I'm right up here. And controls will say, I'm somewhere in the middle. Yeah. So they will always feel that anxiety more acutely, and they will not be able to handle distress and want to resolve it as quickly as possible. So, cognitive dissonance is just whatever I can do quickly to move away from that, shut down that anxiety, shut down that distress. It must be because I've got these conflicting notions in my mind. That means I've got to keep it, or it means I've got to buy it, or whatever the case, or it means I can't touch it or move it, or whatever those things might be. But one of the things that I found interesting when I was looking into, I found some stuff that I had saved and forgotten, which is always lovely. A little bit of an Easter egg. Evidence suggests that cognitive dissonance could be behind what's known as the instant endowment effect and the mere ownership effect. We've talked about that one before. I think you did a potty on
the endowment effect.
Endowment effect. And I've been talking a little bit about the mere repeated exposure effect, which is similar to that whole mere ownership effect. They did some research at a conference, I think, about hoarding, and they were giving people key rings. And they were looking at that kind of, how quickly did people become attached to the key ring. And Kahneman, who developed the endowment effect, also suggested that people can become instantly attached to objects that are given to them. So this recent research I was looking at was saying that when a person was given an object identical to one that they had a negative attitude towards before they were given it, they were actually likely to increase their estimates of the retail value, the design appeal, the attractiveness when they received it. So they had this negative attitude towards it before they were given it, and then they received it and they went, oh, it's worth more now, And this could be cognitive dissonance rather than these other types of cognitive biases, and maybe being forced to accept an object that they previously said was kind of unattractive forces them to adjust their thoughts about that object and improve their ratings. Like, oh, now it's mine. Yeah, I reckon it's all right. Oh, yeah, I'll give it a 5 instead of a 2 or whatever, which I thought was so interesting. So it could actually be more, that could be an element more significant than the endowment effect in a way, because it's about those beliefs about the object that you've received or that's in your home or whatever. You might just decide that it's worth more because initially you didn't really want it and someone gave it to you and you went, wow, it was meant to be. I needed it. Or
yeah, when I was a kid, do you remember Cabbage Patch Kids?
Oh,
those dolls, right? When they were big, I didn't get it. I looked at them and I just thought they looked weird. Like, why are people really into this? All my friends were getting Cabbage Patch Kids and loving them. And I was just like, I don't get it. And then somebody bought me one for Christmas, and did I love that doll? I loved my Cabbage Patch Kid. I absolutely, and I went from, I don't know how old I'd have been, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know. I don't get it. They look weird, to as soon as I had one. And I think because they all had a birth certificate and they all had an original name. Like, there apparently weren't two with the same name. And I think I was like, oh yeah, but it's not just that this one's mine, but it's like mine with a name. Do you know? Yeah.
Clever marketing. See, they pushed all those buttons.
100% it worked.
They pushed all those buttons. You were thinking, I'm not really, could care less. But as soon as you get it, then it opens up this whole new world as well. And you feel so connected to it because it's got it's got its own name, a passport. I had a rice paddy baby, I'll say.
Yeah.
Rice paddy baby from Hong Kong. It had a passport that had whatever date the British had to hand over Hong Kong to the mainland Chinese on there. Wonder what happened to my rice paddy baby. But yeah,
I thought you were going
like,
to say, wonder what happened to Hong Kong.
Well, that too. It's not going so well, is it? It's
quite a long story, to be honest.
Quite a long story, yeah. But the rice paddy baby, and it really, like, I was kind of, and then I got one. I was like, yes, I was exactly like you. I didn't get the hype until it was mine.
Mine was called Katrina, by the way.
Oh, Katrina. I don't remember what mine was called. I don't remember. I've probably still got her. She's probably under the stairs, I mean, hey, I'm on this podcast. I'm here with you. I don't have any moral high ground.
Now on Broadway, An Enemy of the People is a New York Times Critics' Pick. Jeremy Strong is one of the great actors of his generation, hails the Chicago Tribune. In a performance the Wall Street Journal praises as powerfully affecting and bitterly funny. Michael Imperioli sets off sparks, cheers the Hollywood Reporter. Victoria Pedretti is luminous, raves variety. From director Sam Gold and playwright Amy Herzog, An Enemy of the People is urgent, electrifying, and haunting, declares USA Today. An Enemy of the People, on Broadway through June 16th only.
I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
So, given that cognitive dissonance causes discomfort or distress, is that something we can use to drive ourselves to do better in terms of hoarding? Or is it more like when I spoke to Casey Davis in episode 82, there is a phrase that sums up part of her philosophy, which is shame is the enemy of functioning. And we talked about how if you feel shame about yourself or your situation, occasionally it can push you to take action. But the vast majority of the time, you just curl up in a ball and do nothing. So is the discomfort associated with cognitive dissonance something we can use to push ourselves, or is it more like something that would make us shut down?
It's an interesting question. I do think that the fact that there is discomfort could be a signal for us to examine what's going on in the moment. So it's kind of a neutral, it's a neutral situation where there is discomfort, but it's a signal, it's a sign that we need to observe what's happening.
And say, oh, that's interesting. What's happening here? Yeah.
Exactly. And like we've said before, anxiety is kind of often felt in the body before our brain catches up. So we can react without examining the consequences of the behaviors that we use to cope with our anxious feelings, because they come on us all of a sudden physically, and we kind of go, oh, quickly, I need to cope. I need to shut that down. So I'll do what I always do without really analysing or examining the consequences. So I do think there's some, I think it is something that can help us, and drive us to do better. I remember once the items in the home, it's extremely difficult to change our beliefs about, waste and scrupulosity. And as we just discussed before, once it's found its way in, however, the object is likely to induce compliance. We own it, so we must want it, need it, like it. I mean, that's kind of imposed on us, isn't it, through these sort of biases. And if we can be more conscious of the discomfort and what it actually means in the moment, we can use it to drive change in our lives. But that's a really interesting question. I do think it's one that we need to think about.
It's a question that I have ongoing cognitive dissonance over in general, How much,
is it good? Or how much discomfort can I,
Yeah, how much do I, because I think when shame or discomfort does push you into action, I know I've sometimes gone, oh, well, that last time I was really proactive, I felt terrible about myself. So I almost need to induce that to make it happen again. And it's really counterproductive. But then it's that whole thing of being motivated by wanting good things, or being motivated by hatred of how things are, and where that line should be, and some things are short-term helpful and long-term damaging. And it's a really tough one.
It is a really tough one, and things that making those negative feelings force you to change. As you say, it might work really well in the short term and give you a short term burst, but then long term, you're just going to have this chances are it'll just be kind of this depressed sort of state where you think, well, okay, I felt crap all of that time. I did a little bit and now I feel crap again. It wasn't worth it. And you just sink into this hole of despair. But I think if you do things to make yourself feel good, so if that discomfort happens or that distress around not understanding those things and you're more open to it and you think more creatively about it, then I think you'll feel some sense of self-efficacy around the problem. You know, oh, I can do it. I can think about things that are contradictory. I'm not just black and white.
And that leads nicely on to the next question, actually, which is, I first of all thought this might be a weirdness about me, but I don't think so much now. There's one specific form of cognitive dissonance that I actually enjoy. And for me, that is in novels. When I'm reading a novel, I like novels that make me question myself, make me question my beliefs. I'm currently reading a book by Dawn French. It's very good, about a woman who steals a baby, steals a newborn baby. Now, in every situation, I believe that's wrong. Of course I do. But what the book is doing is giving me moments of real sympathy for the woman who steals the baby and seeing her perspective. And I enjoy that weird feeling of having opposing beliefs in my head at the same time. I had similar feelings there was a book that was huge at the time called We Need to Talk About Kevin. About
Lionel Shriver, isn't it?
That's the one. A woman whose son becomes a school shooter. We know that from the beginning, and then it's through his life. And half of the time, and she kind of gets this belief that her child is evil from from when he's a baby. And so half the time you're reading it going, babies can't be evil. That's not a thing. This is her own stuff. And then half the time you're going, yeah, that is kind of an evil baby. And I like that. Jodi Picoult books, she does exactly the same thing for me.
Yes.
It's holding conflicting thoughts in my head at the same time. And I enjoy that challenge, but only in that kind of safe setting that doesn't have any bearing on my daily life. And then when I was thinking of how that might apply to other people, I was thinking about like people who love roller coasters and they want that danger and safety at the same time. And I think that is the same thing, just a different manifestation of it. But I guess my question is the fact that there can be weirdly enjoyable cognitive dissonance, is that an indication that rather than try and get rid of cognitive dissonance, we could change our relationship with it, change our feelings about it?
Yeah, exactly. Like any reaction to discomfort or distress, like psychological discomfort or distress, it's important to learn how to recognize that it's happening in the moment and be able to turn towards it and say, you're here to tell me that this is inconsistent with my beliefs about waste, aren't you? You're here to tell me there might be a way to think about this differently. That's interesting. I'm curious. What's another way of thinking about this? And reading these types of books, or maybe taking the other side of an argument with yourself about something safe, can kind of help you learn how to tolerate the discomfort and sit with it in a safe, in a safe situation that's not actually, as you say, doesn't have a bearing on your daily life at this point. But it does show that you've got the skills to manage that. So, hey, I can do it. I can have two opposing thoughts. Dialectical behavioural therapy, DBT, that Marsha Lynham developed is about just that. I mean, dialectical means two ideas can be true at the same time. And this element of the therapy can be really helpful in assisting us to use more open-minded thinking. And it is really kind of just that practicing it. Thinking about something, going, I'm going to see how that goes today. I'm going to have an argument with myself about whether I need to keep a full set of crockery, even though I never drink tea. or I never use sauces.
Yeah.
Do I, like that sort of stuff, and there's sit with that discomfort of going, you know what? There is no reason why you need those things. Maybe someone else might want to use them underneath their, house plants, or I can give that, thinking through and arguing with yourself and taking them at both sides is kind of fun.
Yeah, I have teacups because they're pretty, but I drink tea out of mugs because you can get more tea in a mug.
Exactly. So they said they're pretty, but maybe you can't see them because exactly. The idea that something must stay together, those beliefs like that, and the discomfort when someone says, but you don't actually have to. It's like, really? I don't? There's no law.
What you were saying about kind of using it to prove to yourself that you can tolerate that discomfort makes me think of the episode I did on tolerating distress tolerance. And one of the things I realized and talked about was that it's actually not about distress versus no distress. It's about which distress do I tolerate. So if you can't tolerate the distress of discarding something, then you have to tolerate the distress of tripping over it every time you walk into a room. And this sounds a bit like that. Like, it's not like you either have it or you don't. It's about which bit of it do you try and tolerate and which bit do you not.
Exactly. And which way do you want to suffer? Do you want to suffer the distress of letting it go, or do you want to suffer the distress of living with everything piled high?
Exactly.
And that is a choice. And the idea is that you slowly kind of approach that and think more deeply about what you really want and how you really want to live. And you will have distress. Full stop. There's no life. There is no highs without lows. There's no joy without sadness. And we kind of have to accept that as the human condition.
Do you want to be a de-hoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a de-hoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So the truth is that the world is confusing and that seemingly opposing facts can be true at the same time. You can both love and hate an abusive parent without that being a contradiction. You can love your work colleagues but not want to see them today. That's how things are. How do we know which bits of cognitive dissonance are just a reflection of how life is and which, like the more hoarding related ones I mentioned earlier, are suggestive of a deeper problem?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, goodness, isn't the world full of contradictions? It is just unbelievable. I do think it's about reflection. If we find ourselves giving into a rigid belief and the consequences of our actions are significantly impacting our physical or psychological health, then we need help. Then it's kind of a deeper problem, because the rigid belief, although on the surface it may seem appropriate as a general belief, if we're applying it rigidly and not considering the consequences of those actions, and we're really physically or psychologically being harmed, then we need to see that as a deeper problem. And we need to examine what those emotions and the bodily sensations and thoughts are that show up when we're in our struggle, when we're fighting ourselves almost with that dissonance. this struggle may be tension around those inconsistencies of our beliefs. And we're trying to change, but the dissonance is holding us back. And that's an interesting thought, that struggle. We often talk about that. What do you do when you're in your struggle? What is it that you do to avoid that tension, to cope with that tension? Do you feel it, or do you avoid it by doing other things? And yeah, perhaps that's just this dissonance going on. It's an interesting thought, actually. I hadn't really thought about that until I was working on this, going, the struggles. Is that because there's these inconsistencies in our thoughts?
Yeah, so it's like as you said earlier, it can serve as a prompt, like this is something I clearly need to look at. But then in terms of whether it's a problem or not, it's more about the impact it has. Like if you have cognitive dissonance about something and it makes you think about it more deeply, that's all good. If you have cognitive dissonance about something and you just think, okay, that's confusing, but it's how things are, that's all good. If you have it and you realize you're almost using it to justify destructive behaviors, that's the problem. So it's the result rather than the fact that the thinking is going on.
Exactly. Yeah, it is those consequences. What actually happens when we when we deal with it, and I do think that is the crux of it. It's not about whether they're there; it's about what we do with them. And if we're justifying, if we're using that to using the resolving of the dissonance by doing something and justifying those behaviours that are damaging us, well then that's a red flag.
Yeah. Now, when I was researching this, I came across this idea called effort justification and added it as, because when Jan and I are doing these episodes, we have like a rough outline. So I send Jan an outline of what we're going to talk about, so that, and you wanted to do that from the beginning to make sure that you're speaking from an informed point of view rather than off the top of your head, which is what real experts do.
Well, yeah, I think I don't think we would have done this many if I just flown off the top, because
and so
I'm not that good.
No, it's because you're conscientious. That's why.
The C word. Yep, I am conscientious. That is for sure.
And so I came across this idea called effort justification, and I was reading about it thinking, I think there's something in this in relation to cognitive dissonance and hoarding, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So I included it as like a prompt with, if you can't find a relevance, we could skip this bit. But from our chat beforehand, it sounds like you did find some kind of relevance. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, it was very interesting when I kind of poked this idea of effort justification. And I actually feel like it's something that we need to investigate experimentally in this, in this cohorter, in this within this disorder. So the idea is that a person's has a tendency to attribute greater value to outcomes that they've put greater effort into, compared with someone else's objective value of the outcome. But it goes a step further than that. In fact, whenever a person engages in an unpleasant activity to attain some desirable outcome, dissonance is aroused. And dissonance can be reduced by exaggerating the desirability of the outcome. Now, that all sounds like word salad, but what that's really saying is that the more unpleasant that activity is, the more we exaggerate how great the outcome will be, how wonderful it will be. And this is kind of the core of a lot of, conspiracy theories, doomsday cults, all this kind of stuff. And in fact, Leon Festinger, the social psychologist, put it really well in this book that he wrote about a doomsday cult called When Prophecy Fails. And it was a situation where there was this one woman who said she'd heard from aliens that they were going to destroy the world and they were going to come and take just her, her followers. So his quote was, when people are committed to a belief in a course of action, clear disconfirming evidence may simply result in a deepened conviction and increase the proselytizing. So it's this, the more committed they are, the clearer, they see it. There's any evidence that disconfirms that. Now, if what they have to do in order to achieve the outcome, if it's a humiliating kind of hazing ritual, or if it's something that they need to give up, or if they have to, it's the whole idea, cutting your hair or all of those kinds of humiliating sort of hazing or group rituals will then make you feel like what you're doing is worth so much more. The outcome is worth so much more. I mean, the more you go out on a limb, the more you have to lose with respect to face, and you'll double down on your beliefs.
Even like running a marathon, a lot of that, not that I've ever done it, nor will I, but a lot of that from people who do it is awful. Like, you are in pain. You might have to wee while you're running in front of everybody.
Yeah.
You're covered in blisters. You're so thirsty, and there's still like 7 miles to go. And so, of course, the euphoria at the end is immense, partly because you can stop.
Exactly. You're still alive, hopefully.
Most of the time, you survive.
Most of the time. But that just, that freaks me out, the whole idea of the more unpleasant the things are you have to do, the more likely you are to say, yeah, this was great. This is what I really wanted all along. Because of that dissonance, you want to reduce it by exaggerating this fabulous outcome. Unbelievable. And like with the doomsday cult, when the date of the end of the world came and went, the leader just used this as evidence that the group's good work saved the world from destruction. I mean, it's just a roller coaster ride around and around. But Festinger did say there is some point at which the disconfirming evidence has mounted sufficiently to cause the belief to be rejected. Now, there's some sort of threshold, and it depends on the person, right? How much information how much inconsistent information do you require in order to change that belief or to see the light or whatever it might be? I mean, an individual that believes something with their whole heart and they've taken irrevocable actions because of it, well, you're going to fully believe in what you've done, and changing that belief is very unlikely. If someone's just trying to sway you, it's not going to happen. There has to be a build-up of a volume of disconfirming evidence. I think that's something that's really like hoarding related, Yeah,
definitely. I don't know how to word this, but because of effort justification, in order to get to the threshold where it's too much and you kind of get back to neutral, things have to get worse and worse and worse, which until you hit the threshold makes the outcome, you have to make that better and better and better. So it almost feels like you're doing the wrong thing until you hit the threshold and almost relax a bit then.
Exactly. It's just, the more I read about this, the more things kind of clicked into place around our effort justification with so many things as humans.
Giving birth.
really just giving birth. Exactly. There's just so many things, and you just having children. Oh, well, it's the most amazing thing in the world. I've had to give up my life and, and all my time, but it's the best thing that will ever happen to you. And it is. It's like they're a cult leader. Nothing like it. It's like a cult leader, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and in a way, the hoarding or the hoard is kind of like a cult leader. The hoard's needs. It's almost like, it's almost like almost a beast that you kind of feed in a way, because it's just kind of going, I need more. I need to reduce your anxiety by adding more and more and more. But then we know that that's a double-edged sword, because your anxiety increases as the volume of stuff and the distress increases around, you know, just behaving or doing everyday things, showering or, you know, cooking or whatever. It is a very interesting concept. And I do think that sometimes people feel like this is their life's work. You know, I'm saving the planet, or I'm saving
every copy of, yeah.
I'm the only one who's going to keep every copy of the Herald Sun or from 1950. And look, that may in fact be true. But is that really your responsibility, and is that really your life's work? Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Some of what you said there also made me think back to conspiracy beliefs about how if somebody believes whatever it is, and evidence comes out that looks like it backs them up, they embrace it. But if evidence comes out that contradicts their beliefs, it's almost like, well, they would say that, and that becomes more proof that they're right. It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yep.
So whatever evidence comes out proves them right.
Exactly. And there's just no way of breaking that down. And sometimes they may never be evidence that will convince them, if they're that, if they have committed so much of themselves to the idea, then they would rather, you know, it's like, which hill do you want to die on? And they want to die on that hill, that's fine. And they may very well do that. You know, if it's a conspiracy belief about COVID or whatever it might be, you know, well, that belief will never change.
There's a subreddit, I'm sure there are many, where people just talk about having lost a parent to QAnon.
Oh.
And how their previously fairly regular functioning parent is now a 100% obsessed with Q, and how their relationships are untenable now because of this degree of obsession from their parent to this particular ideology. And it's and they are heartbroken when they write about it on this. I haven't read it for a while, but I read it regularly for a while because it is interesting and really worrying. They can't have a conversation with their parent anymore without it coming down to children being held underground. And it's not so much what they believe, it's the absolute rigidity of it. And the obsession that there's no other topic of conversation. And with hoarding, it's not so much that there's no other topic of conversation, but that rigidity is the same, isn't it? In terms of, no, I do need it. I need this thing. The inflexibility.
Exactly, the inflexibility. And the other thing I think, and it happens a little, it's happening in all areas of our lives now that we have social media, and we can be siloed into, we can talk with only those people who hoard, or we can talk with only those people who believe in QAnon, or we can, we're really siloed, and it just compounds and adds and adds and adds all of this confirming evidence that we believe is there. And there might be just a a dash of something, we might fleetingly see a headline go, oh, yeah, they'd say that if, oh, God, of course they're going to say that. There's just not, there's too much siloing in social media. We just stick with our crew.
100%. A prime example of that in the UK was Brexit, where the pro-Brexiters were convinced they were going to win because everybody they spoke to agreed with them. And the anti-Brexiters were convinced they were going to win because everybody they spoke to agreed with them. And the result was that the pro-Brexiters won. But what's interesting was that the referendum results was 48% and 52%, right?
Wow.
So
they were both right.
Yeah, they were both right and both wrong. That, in my both friendship circles and social media circles, 90% of people were against Brexit. And if I had different friendship circles and different beliefs, 90% of my people would have been pro. And the fact that the result was so close is both painful, but also very telling about exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And partly it's like a safety thing. It's, as a gay person, I don't surround myself with homophobic people because that would be really toxic for me. As a woman, I don't surround myself with misogynists because that would be really toxic for me. And so there's that, which is valid. But then when it's about just different opinions, it's nice to be surrounded by yes people. But is it healthy? I'm not sure.
No. Yeah, exactly. It's nice to be constantly propped up, isn't it? To have your ideas and your thoughts confirmed and applauded and all of those things. But we don't live in a vacuum just with those people. We have to live in an environment where we're open to all ideas. And if that changes, then even if it changes more than it is now, that's a big concern.
So my next question, I might reassess a bit, which was, how can we reduce cognitive dissonance, especially in relation to hoarding? But given what we've talked about, I'm wondering whether reducing it should be the goal, or whether it should be something like, how can we manage it or harness it or cope with it?
Well, here's kind of the crux of it. Beliefs that are less resistant to change, because that's what we're talking about, aren't we? We're talking about these beliefs that are, either resistant or not, will change more readily than those that are resistant to change. And resistance to change is based on the responsiveness of the belief to reality. So we're kind of like, the extent to which these beliefs are kind of consistent with other cognitions, I think is really important to think about. The other thing that is interesting and needs to be taken into account is self-consistency, because hoarding is something that's egosyntonic. That is, it's consistent with our beliefs of who we are, rather than ego-dystonic behaviors that are things like, say, intrusive thoughts in OCD that are, violent or, or racial, or racist, or they go against our beliefs. That's abhorrent to us. So it makes us, we that hoard, it makes it more difficult for us to question our beliefs and change, because they kind of consistent with the beliefs of who we are. So that is kind of a really key thing to remember when we're thinking about managing our cognitive dissonance. The other thing that I think is interesting to ponder is how resistant to change the behavioural cognitive element is depends on the extent of the pain or loss to be endured relative to the satisfaction to be obtained from the behaviour. So how much pain and loss do we have to go through in order to obtain what we desire. And
Yeah.
that can be huge for us, because the pain and the loss is almost like, death by 1,000 cuts, because we have to go through all of these losses of, and discomfort of letting all this stuff go in order to achieve the result. Now, how much pain and loss do we want to endure for that result, which is what we talked about earlier. How much do we want to suffer for the outcome? And it can be almost an existential crisis for many of us. We've been struggling endlessly because we believe something so wholeheartedly, but it might be harming us. And we've got this whole concept of, but this is me. I can't change my beliefs without losing myself. And we've doubled down because the information we've gathered is consistent. We are right. And this whole idea that, but what if I'm wrong and everyone else is right? Or what if I've been living outside of reality for so long I don't know which way's up? These can be all really complex ideas and thoughts that can go, through our minds as we're battling or managing the dissonance. Because if we just go with our beliefs, if we just go with the flow of what we believe now to reduce that dissonance, well, we will get more of the same. But what if considering those inconsistent beliefs could be helpful? What if we could do something that might change the ratio with those variables that we talked about before? So if we use smoking as an example, the theory goes that we can remove the inconsistent belief. So we can ignore or dismiss the research about health hazards of smoking and just go, no, that was terrible research, I don't believe it. Or we can add new consistent thoughts. We could add the thought that smoking calms us down and helps us manage our health, our mental health. Or we can reduce the importance of the dissonance. Like my grandma smoked till she was 93 and she was never sick a day in her life. I've got good genes, so the importance is reduced. Or we can increase the importance of the inconsistent thoughts, like smoking is the only joy in my life. If I don't smoke, I won't be able to function. So those are the kinds of things that if we can take those sorts of elements and that's kind of a negative. Smoking is kind of a negative one to deal with. But
it's interesting that even when I quit smoking, which, as we've talked about on the podcast before, was incredibly hard, even in the early days when I was having to remind myself of a lot of things to keep myself focused, it still wasn't, it will give you lung cancer. Still wasn't the thing I was focused on. It's funny, isn't it? But also there was a famous book. It was big for a while by a man called Alan Carr, but not the British comedian Alan Carr, a different Alan Carr. Do you know, I would read a stop smoking book by Alan Carr, comedian.
Me too. I was thinking, give me the name. I'll read that.
The other Alan Carr wrote a book about how to stop smoking, and I read it, and I mainly remember two things from it. One is that he tells you to keep smoking until the end of the book. And the result of that is that me and a good 10 people I know read it all except the last chapter, because we knew that if we finished the book, we had to stop smoking. So we would just go, oh yeah, I'm going to read the last, I'm going to, and we never did. But the other thing, the positive I got from it was one particular contradiction that I'd never thought of that it highlighted. And one is that when you're a smoker and you're stressed, you say, I need a cigarette to calm down. But when you're really tired, you go, I need a cigarette to perk myself up. And he highlighted that the absolute ridiculousness of that we use. And similarly, I'm sure people who abuse alcohol do the same. They need a drink to wind down, or they need a drink so they can be sociable. And it's that stuck with me, even though it was still a good while before I quit. After I read
Mm,
that, it wasn't that made me quit, but it planted a seed, as you mentioned earlier,
mm,
like, actually, are my beliefs about this as clear as I think they are?
mm. Exactly. And is my experience matching my beliefs? Is what happens when I have a cigarette? Am I
Yeah,
perking up or am I relaxing? What's
yeah.
actually happening? And that was the kind of thing that I wanted to close with. That we've talked about psychological flexibility before, and I bang on about values all the time. This is kind of really about present moment awareness and sitting with the discomfort and still choosing your path, whatever that path might be. Being open to, our openness to change, feeling like we want to explore, be curious, and be creative about how we are living in the world, and values. But we've got to remember that anything that we hold too tightly can become problematic. Values included. It could be a good value, but if we hold it too rigidly, it can still limit us. We can still have that attachment to the value, and the consequences can still be problematic for us, which is hard to take, but it does start with awareness and curiosity.
And what I'm now thinking, having had this conversation, is that just having an awareness of cognitive dissonance might make me more able to say, I want to keep this and I should let it go. And those two things can be true. And that can happen. I can let it go even though I want to keep it, because
Yeah.
that's just cognitive dissonance and it's fine. It's not hurting me.
Yeah. And there is the long-term vision of what you're seeking.
Yeah.
I think that is kind of the whole the result of following my belief on one side rather than the other. Which consequence do I want at the
Yeah.
end of the day? What do I want to get from this?
Yeah.
It's something that we all struggle with. Some for different, there's all, I might not struggle with it so much around possessions, but it might be something else that I suffer. But being aware of it, that is the first step. Being aware that that's what's happening, and investigating, doing, as I always say, do some journaling. But journaling is really, really helpful to kind of tease out those ideas, and even just writing down what all your beliefs are around, it might be letting go of those, coffee mugs that you don't use anymore. Well, what are all my beliefs around that? And there could be a lot. When you start writing them down, there could be all sorts of things that you're using as either justification or ways to kind of, follow a belief that is no longer serving you.
And I think I sometimes feel like I don't have the patience for journaling, but I feel like my equivalent to that is get a big piece of paper and a pen and just jot down words, notes, thoughts. And yeah, a big piece of paper with all your contradictory thoughts. Just get them down, get them out.
Exactly. And look at them kind of,
dispassionately.
Dispassionately. Yeah. Without judgment, it kind of go, wow, that's so interesting. Look at all, and even highlight, you could even go to the stage of color coding. Oh, these are all, and they're all, and just kind of look at it as a map. And chances are it's going to be the same for most of the ways you you decide about what you keep and what you let go of. That is a really good way. The more visual it is, and maybe that's something you pop up on the wall and you can turn to it and go, yeah, ha. I've had all four of those thoughts, one of those, but what do I want my outcome to be? Yeah, I think just that big piece of paper and just scribbling them out.
Yeah.
Is a great great way to work through it.
So, Dr. Eppingstall, if people want to find you online, where can they do so?
I am at Stuff_ology on Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. And you can find me at Stuffology Consulting on Facebook. You can drop me an old school email, jan@stuffology.com.au. Yeah, pop over to the website, stuffology.com.au, sign up for the free newsletter for every Sunday.
And is well worth it.
And just, I love to hear from people. I love the emails I get. I love the messages I get. So please connect.
And all of those links will be in the show notes if you are currently going, I don't have a pen.
I can't find a pen.
Chances are you have 30 pens, but it may not be in reach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. As ever, a wise voice in our ears.
Thank you for having me. Take care, everyone.
Do you have any burning questions you'd love me to answer? I'll get to the top tip in a second, but my first Q&A episode was really popular, so I'm going to be open to questions on a rolling basis, and then when I have enough, I'll make another episode answering them. Contact me on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or plain old email. All the links are on my website at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Ask me anything and I will do my best to answer it. Now, your top tip. So my top tip this week is a little snippet from a TikTok video of a woman called Mercury Stardust. And slight context is needed, and that is Mercury shows people how to do a lot of DIY tasks. And she's responding to the video of a woman whose husband punished her by taking the batteries out of the thermostat. And this woman was distraught and calling herself stupid because she didn't know how to fix the thermostat. Now, that is, if not outright abusive behaviour from the husband, it is borderline abusive behaviour from the husband. Depriving somebody of heat is not okay. However, that's not the point. The point is this woman thinks she's stupid, and this is what Mercury says in response before showing her how to fix the problem.
Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. First and foremost, you are not stupid at all. All of us learn things at different moments in our life, and right now you have an opportunity to learn something. You're not dumb for not knowing.
And I love that. I love that because it's true. We know certain things and we don't know other things, and it doesn't make us any, there's always going to be things we don't know. We can't know everything. And if we beat ourselves up for not knowing things, it doesn't get us anywhere. And it's quite unreasonable. Whereas if we just go, okay, there are things I know and there are things I don't know, and none of that makes me a good person or a bad person, then I think we're setting ourselves up for a better view on life. So I will link to Mercury Stardust's TikTok account in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support, and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.